With Frankie Corrado, Zach Werenski is the latest superstar that looks like he wants out. If the reigning Norris Trophy winner is indeed available, Frankie, should the Leafs be all in, even if that means trading Matthew Knies, picks, and prospects?
Controversial answer here, Gino, because it's the Norris Trophy winner. So you would think that I'm just going to say yes because you're adding one of the best defensemen in the NHL to your team, so it automatically makes you better. But I'm going to say no because of the acquisition cost involved to bring in Zach Werenski. It's going to make Toronto play a little flashier, a little fancier, but it doesn't really make Toronto a better team. And I'll use two examples for you. The Vegas Golden Knights it felt like a finished product. So they brought in Mitch Marner, the cherry on top. They got to the Stanley Cup final. It wasn't a high acquisition cost. They didn't become in a deficit because they had to give up so much to get him. I'll give you another example. The Carolina Hurricanes brought in Nikolai Ehlers as a free agent. Zero acquisition cost, so it helped their team. They didn't have to pull from somewhere else to try and make themselves better in a different position. So Toronto's in a unique spot here because they would have to give up, let's say, Matthew Knies, maybe another prospect, maybe another player on their roster. So sure, you have Zach Werenski. In theory, you are a better team. But are you a better team because you're pulling from other areas and now you're at a deficit up front? So it's more of a complex situation than that. But the short answer is to say that should they be all in on Zach Werenski? No, because their acquisition cost is going to be too high and it's going to leave them at a deficit at different areas of need within that lineup.
All right, you opened a can of worms, so let me follow up on that. So by saying what you're saying it's not enough to bring in one of the premier defensemen in the entire NHL because this team is just not ready for that sort of talent to turn things around very quickly. If that's the message that you're sending out there, then what are you saying to Auston Matthews when you're saying, Austin, listen, we realize Werenski would be awesome, but we're just not good enough the way we are, so there's no use bringing him in now. We could use him in maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, but not now. Is that not the message you send Auston Matthews and Willie Nylander and the rest of this Leafs team?
That might be the message that I would send as Frankie Corrado, the GM, but maybe John Chaika, he sends a different message. And maybe this is something that he wants to do and pursue. And maybe he looks at it and says, you know what? I'll figure out the rest later. I'm going to get Zach Werenski. And if it's going to cost me Matthew Knies, and if it's Easton Cowan or Ben Danford or whoever else, I'll figure that out. I'm going to patch this thing up as time goes on. I will say this. John Chaika has done a really nice job here so far in the short time that he's been general manager of being proactive and assertive. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is something that did happen. And to your point, Gino, Auston Matthews has 2 years left on his deal. Zach Werenski has 2 years left on his deal. You could broach this subject by saying we're going to go all in for 2 years, and when we get to the end of the 2 years, we'll just figure the rest out. We're going to have to do something, but as long as Auston Matthews is here, we're making a push for it. I guess it really depends what that push is. How do we define that push, okay? Is it winning a Stanley Cup or is it making the playoffs? Because I could make the argument that if you trade a lot of big pieces for Zach Werenski, you can push to make the playoffs. But you're not going to have enough at other areas of need within your lineup that allow you to truly compete for a Stanley Cup, given A, the strength of the Atlantic Division, and B, the strengths of the Eastern Conference as a whole.
Let me ask you this then. I'll take it a step further. If you do take a shot at Werenski and do bring him in, does that then send a message and make this organization that much more appealing? In the backside, we've got Zach Werenski. Up front, you got Auston Matthews. Would that make it easier to attract other players come free agency next season? And does that accelerate then the rebuild if you took that step?
There's a world where that's the case. The only thing is, as we saw, this 2026 crop of free agents, if you went back 12 to 18 months ago, this was going to be the most stacked group of free agents that we've seen in a long, long time. And slowly, time went on and players got locked up into contracts and they didn't make it to July 1st. So you can have high aspirations about players potentially being out there and having the allure of coming to play for the Leafs and Auston Matthews with Zach Werenski and trying to win a Stanley Cup while the last dance is currently on. But you can't count on that many impact players potentially being there for you when you get to that point, because we're living in a world now, Gino, where players are going to be re-signed by their teams because their teams aren't squeezed as tight to the cap, so they have the marketplace dollars available for a lot of these guys. So a lot of the work you're going to have to do is with trades. So that would be the way that they would have to try and go about things. And you make the big deal for Zach Werenski. That's your big asset in Matthew Knies going out the door. So that's what you got back, and it's great. It's a Norris Trophy winner. It's the real deal. #1 defenseman, franchise guy, but you need more than that. Let me use one more example for you. The Dallas Stars brought in Mikko Rantanen. Out the door went Logan Stankoven. At the time, you're like, well, Mikko Rantanen is a surefire upgrade. This makes the Dallas Stars better, and it makes them more likely to win a Stanley Cup. You know who won that Stanley Cup? Logan Stankoven and the Carolina Hurricanes. So sometimes the big piece that comes in doesn't equal you win a Stanley Cup. You need to have a deep team. Forwards 1 through 12, defensemen 1 through 6. We've seen the four-man show in Toronto not work before. Why would it work this time around?
All right, I want to talk goaltending for a second. Another name attached to the Leafs is Sergei Bobrovsky. He's going to be 38 before the start of the next season. Is coming off the worst save percentage season of his career. Should the Leafs ignore, explore, or absolutely lock up Bobrovsky?
Explore. I think it's very fitting for the Toronto Maple Leafs to explore the possibility of Sergei Bobrovsky, even though what I just said about Zach Werenski and not being all in on that transaction, but for Sergei Bobrovsky, there's something to be said about the position Toronto is in, where they're maybe trying to make the playoffs, there's no doubt about it, and he can play a lesser workload than what he did for the Florida Panthers. Maybe his tandem partner is Anthony Stolarz, or maybe it's Akhtiamov, who he knows, and there's a relationship there already. It's a fascinating thing because Toronto needs a different look in net, and Bobrovsky would represent that. He would also represent a different kind of goalie than what they've had. They've had goalies that maybe you expected more than what they're currently capable of. Well, Sergei Bobrovsky, they would be asking for just a little bit less than what the Florida Panthers were asking for the last few seasons. So I think it's very prudent for the Toronto Maple Leafs to explore the possibility of Sergei Bobrovsky potentially.
I want to get back to this year's free agent class of the names that you were talking about. Lacks the big names, but there is some depth. So in your mind, who should John Chayka target then?
Scott Laughton. Why not go back to the well with a guy who played for the Leafs and wasn't utilized correctly, but then once he got moved to the Los Angeles Kings, was slotted the way he was supposed to be slotted as a third-line center, playing more minutes, and really flourished in that role. There were too many times when Scott Laughton was a member of the Maple Leafs, he got stuck playing fourth-line wing, 11 minutes a night. It never felt like he gained enough traction in the role that he was in. But with Scott Laughton, he would help the Toronto Maple Leafs insulate the middle of the ice, which is an area they need some help. As of today, it's Matthews, it's Tavares, and it's two largely unproven players in Bo Grew and Jacob Quillen who have been in the minors for the majority of their careers. So bringing back a centerman like Scott Laughton, who you know, you trust, and you just saw take on a more elevated role and flourish with that elevated role, makes a lot of sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
So much to talk about, so much work to do. TSN's Free Agent Frenzy coverage begins 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific on Wednesday. We'll also have you covered all day long with content on YouTube and on tsn.ca.